Lightning split the warehouse sky into two halves, light and shadow, mercy and violence, as the thunderstorm hammered the metal roof like fists demanding entry. Rain streamed down the industrial windows in sheets so thick the outside world disappeared completely, leaving only the underground poker room suspended in its own pocket of cigarette smoke and desperation. 30 men in suits that cost more than most people's cars sat frozen around green felt tables, their gold watches catching the overhead fixtures, their breathing stopped mid-exhale. The sound came first. A door crashing open at the warehouse's back in trance, the rain outside briefly roaring louder before the door slammed shut again. Footsteps. Stumbling, drunk, angry footsteps crossing the concrete floor. Tyler Brennan appeared like a curse that could not be erased. 6'2", muscular in the way of a man who spent his rage at a gym, his face flushed with alcohol and something meaner underneath. His shirt hung partially unbuttoned, revealing the chest of someone who believed his body was a weapon. Behind him, her designer heels clicking in counterpoint to his stumbling, came Sophie Langford. 38 years old but carved by cosmetic procedures into something that resembled a woman, cold blonde hair, colder eyes, her phone already raised to eye level with a smile spreading across her face that held no warmth, only hunger. Rowan Santos stood beside the poker table in her stained apron and orthopedic shoes worn through at the heel, holding a tray of drinks she had just delivered. 5'4", dark hair pulled back so tightly it strained at her temples, her face the particular kind of beautiful that comes from suffering, angular cheekbones, dark brown eyes that had learned not to show fear even when fear lived permanently in her chest. 29 years old but looking 40, as if she had lived 2 lives in the time most people lived one. Tyler's hand shot out and wrapped around her wrist. His fingers were thick. His grip was a statement. "There you are," he said, his words slurring together like a drunk man's song. "I have been looking everywhere for you." The tray in her other hand trembled. Crystal glasses caught the light, began to slip. Rowan did not pull away. This was important. She had learned through 8 years of Tyler Brennan that resistance only made things worse. Resistance made him angry. Resistance made him mean in ways that took weeks to recover from. Sophie's phone rose higher, the camera pointing directly at Rowan's face as she was dragged forward. Sophie's smile widened. "This is going to get so many views," she whispered, mostly to herself, mostly to the phone. "Every employer in this city is about to see what a whore she is." The glass tray fell. It hit the concrete floor and exploded into 1,000 pieces, the sound of shattering crystal so loud it cut through the rain, through the thunder, through everything. 30 men did not move. They had learned long ago that when Tyler Brennan was in a room, when he was angry, the safest thing was to become invisible. Guard hands moved instinctively toward weapons, then froze. There were protocols for violence in the underground poker room, but not for this. Not for this. Matteo Valenti sat at the center table, the head of the green felt, his chair positioned with its back to the wall the way powerful men always position themselves. 34 years old, 6'1", his broad shoulders wrapped in a suit that had been tailored by someone in Milan. His hair was dark, the color of wet stone, swept back from his forehead in a way that suggested he did not think about how he looked because he did not need to. His eyes were gray like a storm that had not yet decided whether to destroy or forgive. A scar ran from his left eye down to his cheekbone, a thin line of pale skin that split his face like a blade through butter. On his right hand, a silver ring with a lion's head, worn smooth by years of being twisted when he was thinking about death. He stood slowly. The chair scraped against the concrete floor. The sound was loud in the silence. Every man in the room heard it. Every man knew what that sound meant. His eyes locked onto Tyler's hand wrapped around Rowan's bruised wrist. She was bruised, he noted. There were marks on her skin that had not been made tonight. There were marks that told stories. Then his eyes traveled up to her face. What he saw there made something cold and dangerous stir in his chest. She was not crying. She was not begging. Her jaw was set like a person who had decided a long time ago that she would not give the world the satisfaction of her breaking. Her eyes burned with a defiance so pure, so absolute, that in that frozen second Matteo saw something in her that mirrored his own hunger for justice. He recognized himself in her refusal. Lightning flashed outside, turning the warehouse white for a single heartbeat. In that white flash, nobody moved. Tyler's hand gripped Rowan's wrist. Sophie's phone pointed upward like a torch. Mateo's grey eyes locked on Tyler's face. The rain hammered. The thunder rolled closer. But what no one in that room understood, what could not have been known in that single suspended moment, was that an 8-year-old boy stood in the warehouse doorway behind Rowan, just barely visible in the shadows, watching everything unfold. His name was Noah. He was supposed to be at the shelter with the other children, sleeping in the room with the blue walls and the drawings taped to the walls. Instead, he had followed Rowan here 3 hours ago, sneaking past the volunteer who was supposed to be watching him, because Noah had learned at the age of 5 that following Rowan was the only way to keep her safe. He did not cry out. He did not run. He simply stood there in the darkness of the doorway, his small hands pressed against the frame, watching the man in the expensive suit look at Rowan the way nobody had ever looked at her before. 3 hours earlier, before the storm arrived, before the warehouse filled with men and cigarette smoke, before Tyler Brennan crashed through the back door, Rowan had been counting money in the bathroom of the diner where she worked the graveyard shift. 3 o'clock in the morning. The diner was almost empty. One old man in a corner booth nursing coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. A couple in a booth near the window, their hands touching across the table, their lives still simple enough that they could afford to sit in a diner at 3 in the morning without calculating the cost. The bathroom was small. The fluorescent light buzzed in a way that made your teeth hurt if you listened to it too long. Rowan had learned not to listen. She stood over the sink and smoothed out 5 crumpled dollar bills onto the porcelain. $1, $1, another $1, 2 more dollars. $5. That was everything she had left in the world until her next paycheck, which was 4 days away, which meant the money had to last 4 days, which meant she needed to figure out how to feed Noah on $1.25 per day. She had done it before. She would do it again. But underneath the $5 bills, stuffed into her apron pocket, was something else. The envelope had arrived 3 days ago. White envelope, printed label, no handwriting. When she opened it, her hands had begun to shake in a way she could not control. Final notice. $200,000. That was the number printed in red across the page. $200,000 in debt, 12 days to pay, or the creditors would begin seizure proceedings against any assets she possessed, which meant the used car she drove, which meant Noah would have no way to get to school, which meant everything would collapse like a house made of paper in a windstorm. She folded the $5 and placed them back in her pocket. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. 29 years old, dark circles so deep they looked like bruises, hair pulled back so tight it made her head ache, wearing a diner uniform that had been washed so many times the fabric had become thin as tissue paper. The scars on her back were hidden beneath her clothing, but she could feel them. She could always feel them. A knock on the bathroom door. Her manager's voice, impatient and male. "Rowan. We need you back out there." She opened the door. She walked back into the diner. She poured coffee for the old man in the corner booth. She smiled at the couple holding hands. She did not let anyone see that anything was wrong, because showing that something was wrong meant questions, meant concern, meant being visible. She had learned to be invisible a long time ago. It was easier that way. The rain outside the diner window had just begun, small drops, tentative, testing whether the night was ready to break open. By 6 o'clock in the morning, when Rowan's shift ended, the storm would be in full collapse, lightning and thunder and water falling from the sky like a punishment. But Rowan did not know that yet. The fluorescent lights hummed above the diner counter like insects trapped in plastic casings, their sickly white glow turning Rowan's hands into pale, skeletal things as she counted the bills for the 3rd time. $5. 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. That was everything. Not everything in her bank account, there was no bank account. Everything in the world that belonged to her, held between 2 trembling fingers at 3 in the morning in a bathroom that smelled of industrial cleaner and human despair. She folded the bills and placed them back in her apron pocket, right next to the envelope that had arrived 3 days ago. The envelope was still there, crisp white paper turned yellow at the edges from her nervous hands unfolding and refolding it 100 times. Final notice. $200,000. 12 days remaining before the creditors began seizure proceedings. $200,000. Rowan looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. 29 years old, but the woman staring back looked older, much older. Dark circles so deep they looked like bruises, her skin the color of old newspaper, her hair pulled back so tightly that it made her scalp ache. The diner uniform hung on her like a flag on a broken pole, the fabric so thin from washing that light passed through it. She could see the outline of her ribs. She could see the geography of her own hunger written across her body like a map. She turned slightly, lifting the back of her shirt in the mirror's reflection. Scars. Dozens of them, running in every direction like a record written in flesh and pain. Some were old, faded to white like ghosts. Others were newer, still carrying the memory of purple and yellow bruising. Each one was a moment. Each one was a fist. Each one was the sound of Tyler's voice saying things that destroyed something inside her that she was still trying to rebuild. She pulled her shirt down quickly, as if the scars might escape into the world if she exposed them too long. A knock. Hard. Impatient. Rowan. We need you back out there. Her manager's voice, muffled through the door but unmistakable in its irritation. She opened the door and walked back into the diner without responding. Speaking back to management meant attention. Attention meant questions. Questions meant being visible, and visibility had become a luxury she could no longer afford. The diner was half full at 3 in the morning. There was an old man in the corner booth nursing coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, his lips moving silently as if he were having a conversation with someone only he could see. There was a couple holding hands across a table meant for 4, their fingers intertwined, their eyes locked on each other with the intensity of people who had just discovered love or were about to lose it. There was a truck driver reading a newspaper from 2 days ago, his flannel shirt stained with grease and resignation. Rowan poured coffee. She smiled. She cleared plates. She did not let anyone see that the 12-day deadline was ticking inside her chest like a bomb. $200,000. That was the cost of Noah's pneumonia 2 years ago. That was what the emergency room had charged when he turned blue, when his small body refused to breathe, when she had to choose between calling an ambulance and losing her apartment. She had called the ambulance. They had saved his life. They had also sentenced her to debt that would never end, that would swallow her whole and everyone attached to her. The rain outside the diner window had just begun, small drops, tentative, testing whether the night was ready to break open. By the time her shift ended at 6, the storm would be in full collapse. At 4:30 in the morning, Mrs. Chen from the shelter texted her. Rowan read it in the diner bathroom, her hands shaking. Last-minute catering job tonight. Pays $300 cash. 5 hours work, high-end private event, clients are particular about discretion. You in? $300. That was more money than she had seen in a single payment in months. $300 meant 2 weeks of groceries. $300 meant she could pay the rent at the laundromat above which she and Noah lived in one room that smelled of soap and mold. Rowan typed back immediately, yes. What time? 9 p.m. I'll text the address. Just serve drinks, don't make eye contact, don't ask questions. These people value privacy. Rowan knew what that meant. It meant dangerous. It meant the kind of people who hurt others and expected silence in return. But dangerous was a relative term when you had 12 days and $200,000 hanging over your head like the blade of a guillotine. She finished her shift at 6 in the morning. The storm outside had arrived in full, lightning cracking the sky open, rain falling in sheets so thick she could barely see across the parking lot. She walked to her car, a 1998 Honda Civic that required 3 tries to start and smelled permanently of wet dog even though she had never owned a dog. The windshield wipers didn't work on the passenger side, just the driver's side, creating an asymmetrical smear of visibility. She drove to the shelter, a converted warehouse in downtown Los Angeles that Mrs. Chen had transformed into something resembling hope. Rowan had started volunteering there 3 years ago, after she had finally escaped Tyler. The work was simple: organize donated clothes, help with meal prep, supervise the children during homework time, listen to their stories, pretend that the world was not actively trying to destroy them. Noah was already awake when she arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with a coloring book, filling in a drawing of a tree with colors that had nothing to do with reality. Purple trunk. Green leaves. Orange sky. When he saw her, his whole face changed, the way a room changes when you turn on the light. Rowan. He jumped down from his chair and wrapped his arms around her waist, his small dark curls pressing against her chest. He was 8 years old and skinny, with eyes so dark they looked black, and a kind of quiet intensity that made people underestimate him. He had been at the shelter for 2 years, ever since his mother had abandoned him in a hospital waiting room and never come back. Rowan held him. For 30 seconds, she held him and let herself believe that she could keep him safe. That she could build something for him. That 12 days and $200,000 were not going to destroy everything. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "How was your night?" "Good. I drew pictures for sad days." He pulled back and showed her the coloring book. "Colors for sad days. When you feel sad, you look at this, and it helps a little." Her heart fractured. 8 years old and already understanding that sadness required coping mechanisms. Already learning that pain was something you colored your way through. "That's beautiful, Noah," she said, and meant it in a way that hurt to say. "That's really beautiful." Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. She was 63, built like a woman who had spent her whole life carrying other people's burdens. Her gray hair was braided in a crown around her head, and her eyes held the particular exhaustion of someone running a shelter on donations and prayer. "Rowan. Come sit. We need to talk about tonight." They sat at the table while Noah went back to coloring, his small tongue poking out in concentration. Mrs. Chen set down the coffee and leaned forward. "The event is at an industrial warehouse, East Side, near the port. The clients are a private poker game, high stakes, dangerous clientele, very particular about anonymity. You'll be serving drinks from 8 until midnight. Cash payment, $300, deposited directly into your hand when you finish." "What kind of people?" Rowan asked. "The kind who don't want to see your face and don't want to hear your voice. You go in, you serve, you stay invisible. That's the job. Stay invisible." Those words were Rowan's religion now. She had spent 8 years learning how to disappear, how to make herself small enough to avoid notice, quiet enough to avoid attention. It was how she had survived Tyler. It was how she survived now. "I can do that," Rowan said. Mrs. Chen reached across the table and squeezed her hand. In her eyes was a look that Rowan recognized, pity mixed with something else. Pity mixed with the knowledge that desperation makes people willing to walk into dangerous rooms. "The address is in the text," Mrs. Chen said. "Dress nice but not too nice. Professional. Black pants, white shirt, comfortable shoes. Don't wear jewelry. Don't wear perfume. Be a ghost." Rowan nodded. She was already a ghost. Being a ghost tonight would not require her to learn anything new. At noon, she returned to her apartment, one room on the 2nd floor of a laundromat building, the smell of detergent seeping into every corner, every wall, every piece of fabric she owned. The room was 12 feet by 14 feet. There was a bed where she slept, a pull-out couch where Noah slept when he was there on weekends, a hot plate, a mini refrigerator, and a closet the size of a show box. She pulled out her backup orthopedic shoes, the one she wore on nights like this. The primary pair had a heel worn completely through, exposing the sole underneath. These backup shoes were held together with duct tape wrapped around the heel, the tape gray and cracked with age. She looked at her reflection in the small bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was someone she did not recognize, or someone she recognized too well. Someone who had learned to disappear. Someone who had learned that survival meant accepting any job, any danger, any humiliation. The rain outside sounded like gunfire against the apartment windows. By 8 o'clock, she was standing outside an industrial warehouse on the east side, lightning illuminating its concrete walls in sharp, violent flashes. Men in dark suits stood at the entrance, 2 of them, massive, their eyes tracking everyone who approached. One of them nodded at her, recognition in his expression suggesting Mrs. Chen had already called ahead. Inside, the space was cavernous, exposed brick, concrete floors, the smell of cigarette smoke and expensive cologne hanging in the air like fog. A single poker table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by 7 men. The men wore suits that cost more than everything Rowan had ever owned. They had the particular look of people accustomed to winning. People accustomed to power. And then one of them looked up. It was the kind of moment that changes things without you knowing it has changed. It was the moment the guillotine blade stopped mid-fall. He was tall, 6'2", maybe taller, built like a man who had spent his life carrying weight that had nothing to do with muscle. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with a white shirt open at the neck revealing a chest marked with a scar that ran from his collarbone to his sternum like a wound that had never fully healed. His hair was dark, slicked back from his face, with silver threading through at the temples. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they were looking directly at her. Matteo Valenti. She did not know his name yet, but she would. She turned away and began setting up drinks on the side table, keeping her eyes down, making herself small, becoming invisible. What changed everything was that Matteo Valenti could not stop watching her. The rain outside sounded like gunfire against the apartment windows. By 8 o'clock, Rowan Santos was standing outside an industrial warehouse on the east side of Los Angeles, lightning illuminating its concrete walls in sharp, violent flashes. Men in dark suits stood at the entrance, 2 of them, massive, their eyes tracking everyone who approached. One of them nodded at her, recognition in his expression suggesting Mrs. Chen had already called ahead. Inside, the space was cavernous. Exposed brick. Concrete floors. The smell of cigarette smoke and expensive cologne hanging in the air like fog. A single poker table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by 7 men. The men wore suits that cost more than everything Rowan had ever owned. They had the particular look of people accustomed to winning. People accustomed to power. And then one of them looked up. It was the kind of moment that changes things without you knowing it has changed. It was the moment the guillotine blade stopped mid-fall. He was tall, 6'2", maybe taller, built like a man who had spent his life carrying weight that had nothing to do with muscle. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with a white shirt open at the neck revealing a chest marked with a scar that ran from his collarbone to his sternum like a wound that had never fully healed. His hair was dark, slicked back from his face, with silver threading through at the temples. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they were looking directly at her. Matteo Valenti. She did not know his name yet, but she would. She turned away and began setting up drinks on the side table, keeping her eyes down, making herself small, becoming invisible. What changed everything was that Matteo Valenti could not stop watching her. 2 hours passed. The rain intensified. Thunder rolled across the warehouse roof like boulders rolling down a mountainside. Rowan moved between the tables with the efficiency of someone who had learned to be everywhere and nowhere, to fill glasses without being seen, to exist in the margins of other people's lives. Her hand stayed steady despite the exhaustion that lived in her bones. Her apron collected stains from spilled whiskey and cigar ash. One of the men grabbed her wrist as she passed, a drunk player with a bloated face and a wedding ring cutting into his flesh. "Smile for me, pretty girl," he slurred. She smiled. Not because she wanted to. Because she needed the job. Because refusing meant no tips. No tips meant eating nothing but the leftover sandwich crust she salvaged from the diner's trash. She smiled and kept moving. Matteo's eyes followed her. Carlo, who stood behind his chair with the patient stillness of a man trained in violence, noticed. He leaned down and whispered something. Matteo did not respond. He simply continued watching as she moved through the green-lit haze like a ghost, like a shadow that refused to leave. In the storage room, Rowan took a 30-second break. She leaned against the concrete wall, her orthopedic shoes worn through at the heel, her back aching where the scars lived. She pulled out the debt collector's letter from her apron pocket, creased, stained, the numbers blurring from repeated reading. $200,000. 12 days remaining. She was $5 short of nothing. She pulled out her phone and did the math one more time, as if repetition might somehow change the numbers. $300 tonight if she was lucky. $180 from the diner tomorrow. Still $199,520 short. The distance was so vast it was almost funny. She almost laughed. The sound came out hollow. She heard shouting from the main room. Glass breaking. The back entrance had crashed open. Tyler Brennan stood in the doorway, soaked from rain, his shirt torn, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. Behind him, Sophie Langford stood with her phone already raised, her manicured finger poised over the record button like someone about to document a kill. Rowan's body went cold. Not the cold of winter. The cold of recognition. The cold of a trapped animal realizing the predator has finally found its burrow. Tyler's eyes scanned the room until they found her. Then his mouth twisted into something that was not quite a smile. "Rowan," he said. His voice was thick, barely intelligible. "I've been looking for you for 3 days." She turned to run. Instinct. The reflexive action of prey. But he was faster. He was always faster. His hand closed around her wrist like a vice, pulling her forward so hard her feet almost left the ground. The impact of his grip sent fire up her arm. "Let go," she said. Quiet. Controlled. She had learned to keep her voice level when he was angry. It sometimes prevented the worst. "Let go." He laughed. It sounded like breaking glass. "You've been avoiding my calls." Hiding from me with this, he gestured violently at the room, at the men in their expensive suits, at the stacks of money and the clicking of poker chips. "You think you're better than me now? You think you can just disappear? We're done, Tyler. We've been done for 2 years. He twisted her wrist. Pain shot through her like electricity. She gasped involuntarily, then stopped herself. Never show pain. Never give him the satisfaction. Sophie stepped deeper into the room, her phone steady, her smile sharp as a blade wrapped in ice. "This is absolutely gold," she said, almost singing the words. "Wait until every restaurant in Los Angeles sees this. Who's going to hire the crazy ex-girlfriend who causes violent scenes? Who's going to trust her with anything?" Rowan felt the words land like punches. The job she needed. The ones that kept Noah fed. Kept his medications paid for. Everything was collapsing in real time, being recorded, being weaponized. Tyler dragged her toward the center of the room, pulling her like a doll. The entire warehouse froze. 30 men stopped mid-conversation. Cards paused mid-deal. Cigarettes hung suspended in mouths. Guards' hands moved toward weapons but stopped, because Matteo Valenti had not signaled. In his world, every action followed his instruction. His permission. His rage. The silence was absolute. Rain hammered the high windows. Cigar smoke hung motionless in the air like a photograph of itself. Lightning flashed, and in that white light, everyone saw clearly Tyler Brennan's fingers digging into Rowan's wrist. Sophie recording with the expression of someone filming entertainment. Rowan's face twisted with pain and desperation. Matteo Valenti stood slowly. The chair scraping across the concrete floor was the loudest sound in the room. Everyone heard it. Everyone flinched slightly. When he was fully upright, his 6'2" frame seemed to command more space than that alone should allow. His shoulders filled the expensive suit. His hands hung at his sides, relaxed, but there was nothing relaxed about his eyes. Those eyes fixed on Tyler's hand around Rowan's wrist. When Matteo spoke, his voice was quiet. Deep and solid like an oath. Like a blade cutting through flesh. You are touching my employee. Tyler, drunk and catastrophically stupid, did not recognize danger when it stood 5 feet away from him. Your employee? This is my. He yanked Rowan's wrist harder for emphasis. Her apron tore. Her shirt pulled up at the back, exposing the thin line of a scar that ran between her shoulder blades like a question mark written in violence. Matteo's eyes fixed on that mark. His jaw tightened. For the first time since anyone had known him, emotion flickered across his face. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. The back door opened. A small figure appeared in the darkness, silhouetted by rain and lightning. Noah. 8 years old. Dark curls plastered to his forehead. Eyes wide with terror. Rowan. His voice was small, terrified, calling like a child calling for safety to a world that had never offered it. Rowan's head whipped around. Noah, go. Go back outside. But Matteo heard the name. Saw the boy's face clearly in the fluorescent light. Something in his expression shifted. Changed. Like a door opening onto a room he thought had burned down 8 years ago. Carlo leaned toward Gino and whispered, "That kid looks exactly like." "Don't," Gino said, cutting him off. But his voice shook. Matteo stared at the boy without blinking. His hand released the table edge. His breathing changed. Something massive and ancient was moving beneath his skin, something his men had never witnessed in 15 years of service. Tyler, oblivious to the transformation happening 3 feet away, shook Rowan violently. "Who's the brat?" "Another charity case you picked up." Sophie filmed, laughing, her phone still raised. "This keeps getting better and better." Rowan wrenched her arm free finally, not because Tyler's grip weakened, but because she moved through pain into pure desperation. She ran to Noah, putting her body between him and everything dangerous in the room. "He's none of your business. Do you understand me? He is not your concern." Tyler advanced. His hand rising. The practice motion of someone who had done this so many times it had become as natural as breathing. Rowan flinched. Automatic. A reflex written into her nervous system by 8 years of this exact motion. The hand coming down. The sound that would come next. The pain. But the hand never fell. Matteo moved. 3 strides and his hand caught Tyler's wrist mid-swing. His grip was iron. Absolute. Not violent. Just completely immovable, like catching your hand on the side of a mountain. Tyler yelped like an animal caught in a trap. Matteo's voice, still quiet, still controlled, still more dangerous than any scream could ever be, "You will leave. Now." Tyler tried to pull his hand back. It did not move. He tried again. Matteo did not even tense. The hand holding him might as well have been made of stone. "Who the hell are you?" Tyler slurred, too drunk to sense the death standing in front of him. The room gasped. Someone actually laughed in disbelief. Carlo covered his face with one hand. Gino muttered something in Italian that sounded like a prayer. Matteo's eyes, storm gray and absolutely still, focused on Tyler with the intensity of a predator that had finally stopped playing with its food. "I am the man who owns this building. This neighborhood. 43% of the businesses you frequent. I am the reason the police you bribed look the other way when you hit women. And I am telling you to leave before I stop being polite about it." The color drained from Tyler's face. The alcohol fog lifted just enough for understanding to arrive. He had just made the mistake that would cost him everything. Sophie's phone was still recording. Matteo glanced at her without releasing Tyler's wrist. "You. Delete that footage." Sophie lifted her chin defiantly. Her designer dress cost more than Rowan made in 6 months. Her hair had been professionally blown out that morning. She had spent her life believing that money and family name created immunity. "I don't think so," Sophie said. My brother-in-law may be trash, but I have rights, and I don't appreciate. Matteo nodded to Gino. Just a small movement of his chin. Gino took 3 long strides, plucked the phone from Sophie's hand with the delicate precision of someone removing a loaded weapon from a child, and dropped it onto the concrete floor. The phone shattered. He stepped on it once more, grinding it under his expensive Italian leather shoe until there was nothing left but pieces. Sophie screamed. An actual scream of rage and shock. Do you know who my family is? Do you understand what you've just done? Sophie Langford, Matteo said, his voice unchanging. Husband manages 3 auto dealerships across Los Angeles. Family money from technology stocks. You sit on 2 charity boards and spend your time destroying people for entertainment. He paused. Yes. I know exactly who you are. And you are leaving now. He turned his attention back to Tyler, still holding his wrist like a man holding a frayed rope. If I see you near her again, Matteo said, you will disappear. No one will find you. No one will ask questions. No one will file missing person reports because the people you owe money to will already know where you are. Do you understand? Tyler nodded so frantically his head seemed disconnected from his neck. Matteo released him. Tyler and Sophie scrambled for the exit, moving like animals fleeing a burning forest. The moment the door closed, the entire room seemed to exhale. Matteo's attention shifted from the departing figures to Rowan, still shielding Noah, both soaking wet from rain, both trembling. Matteo's voice changed. Gentled slightly, though it still carried the weight of absolute authority. You are safe now. Rowan, suspicious and exhausted beyond the limits of trust, stepped protectively in front of Noah. Why would you help me? I'm nobody. I'm just a server, just someone who... How long have you cared for the boy? Matteo asked. That's none of your concern. Noah, young enough to still speak truth without filter, whispered, 3 years. Rowan saved me when I was 5 years old. She found me at the shelter when I was sick and alone and she took me home. Matteo's hand gripped the table edge again. His knuckles went white. In 15 years, Carlo and Gino had never seen their boss show this particular kind of emotion, the kind that comes from something shattering inside you and being rebuilt immediately, so no one sees the fracture. What is the boy's full name? Matteo asked. Rowan's protective instinct flared. I'm not telling you anything until you explain what. Noah Valenti, the boy said softly. My mom died when I was born. My dad, he stopped, looking down at his wet shoes. I never got to meet him. The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds. Rain hammered the roof. Lightning flashed white through the windows. Matteo's face had drained of all color. His chest rose and fell in patterns that suggested he had forgotten how to breathe correctly. Carlo whispered, Madonna Santa. Boss, Isabella was. I know who she was, Matteo said, his voice barely audible. He looked at Rowan with an expression she had never seen before on any human face. Terror and wonder and grief and recognition all occupying the same space, fighting for dominance. Where did you find him? City shelter, Rowan said. 3 years ago. Sick. Alone. No medical records. No documentation of his parents. No one wanted him. Medical care, Matteo said. How much did it cost? That's not relevant. How much? Rowan pulled out the crumpled debt collector's letter, her hand shaking now, and threw it onto the poker table. The letter landed in spilled whiskey, darkening at the edges. $200,000, she said. Her voice was steady but her eyes were glistening. I have 12 days to pay it. I have $5 in my pocket. I have nothing else. So thank you for tonight, but I still have absolutely no idea how I'm supposed to survive this. Matteo picked up the letter. He read it carefully, his eyes tracking every word, every number, every stamp of finality. He folded it with precise movements and slipped it into his jacket pocket. What are you doing? Rowan demanded. That's. The debt is paid, Matteo said. As of right now, at this moment, your debt is paid. All of it. Every dollar. Rowan stared at him. I don't accept charity. I don't know you. I don't. It is not charity, Matteo said. His voice was quieter than it had been all evening, but somehow it carried more weight. You protected my son when I believed him dead. When I was searching for him for years, believing he was gone, you were feeding him. Keeping him safe. Giving him care I could not provide. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked like ice breaking under pressure. This debt is the least of what I owe you. I don't need your pity, Rowan said. Matteo stepped closer. His hand reached toward her but did not touch. It is not pity. It is payment. And it is, he stopped, looking at Noah, then back to Rowan. You will work for me. Not serving drinks. Real work. Starting tomorrow, you and Noah will move into protected housing. Security. Medical care. Education for the boy. Everything. I don't need. Yes, he said simply. You do. And I owe you everything. Outside, the rain continued falling like a blessing or a curse, depending on which direction you were standing. 3 days had passed since that night in the warehouse, 3 days of Rowan waking in a bed that did not belong to her, in an apartment on the 32nd floor of a building she could not afford, in a life that felt borrowed like a dress she had stolen from someone else's closet. The apartment was clean. Impossibly clean. Marble floors that reflected light like water, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Los Angeles stretching out beneath them like a kingdom someone else owned. Noah had his own room now. His own room. With walls painted soft blue and books stacked on shelves and a new inhaler sitting on the nightstand because Matteo Valenti apparently knew that Noah's asthma flared in the mornings. Rowan stood at the kitchen counter at 6 in the morning, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she was too anxious to drink, watching the city wake beneath the grey skin of dawn. She had not slept more than 2 hours since arriving here. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the apartment closing around her like a cage made of velvet, suffocating her with its kindness. The door to the guest room opened. Matteo emerged wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything she had owned in her entire life, his dark hair slightly damp from the shower, that terrible scar catching the first light coming through the windows. He moved like he always moved, each gesture controlled, deliberate, a man who had learned long ago that wasted motion signals weakness. You have not slept, he said. Not a question. I sleep fine, Rowan lied. Matteo crossed the kitchen and poured coffee with the same precision he brought to everything. When he drank it, he closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, the only sign she had ever seen him give that he needed anything at all. Noah asked me to read to him last night. He fell asleep after 3 pages. He has not felt safe enough to sleep deeply in years. You did that. And now you are standing here suffocating in the gratitude of a man who owes you everything. Rowan's hands tightened on the mug. I can't stay here. I'm not someone who takes charity. I kept Noah safe for 3 years before you showed up. I don't need rescuing. I know. So let me leave. Let us both leave. I can find work, I can. Rowan. He set his cup down with a soft clink that seemed to echo through the entire apartment. Show me your back. No. Show me. She wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at her to keep those scars hidden, to pretend they did not exist, to maintain the fiction that she was strong enough to have survived without needing anyone. But something in his voice, not a command, not cruelty, something like a prayer, made her hands move. She pulled her shirt up and over her head. The scars ran in every direction like a map of hell. 8 years of Tyler Brennan's fists, his belt, the edge of a broken bottle, all of it written across her back in white lines that would never fade. Some were thick and ropey. Others were thin like knife cuts. A few still carried the faint purple of newer damage that had not quite finished healing. Behind her, Matteo made a sound like someone had driven a blade through his ribs. 8 years, she said quietly, turning to face him while keeping the ruined landscape of her back visible. 8 years I went to the police. 8 different times I showed them these scars and filed reports. 8 different times they told me there was nothing they could do because Tyler knew people. Because he paid them. Because I was nobody and he was somebody with money and connections and friends in the right places. For 8 years I rebuilt myself alone. I don't need saving, Matteo. I need freedom. He stared at the scars without speaking. His jaw had gone hard as granite, and something cold and dangerous stirred behind his eyes. The cops, he said finally. The ones he paid. Their names. What are you going to do? Their names, Rowan. She told him. 3 names. Detective Marcus Webb. Officer Sean Halley. Sergeant David Chen. Matteo nodded to Carlo, who materialized from somewhere in the apartment the way Matteo's men always did, quietly, expectantly, ready to act on a single gesture. Carlo wrote the names down. At that same hour, across the city in a neighborhood where the buildings were older and the street smelled like exhaust and yesterday, Tyler Brennan was drinking whiskey at 10 in the morning and making phone calls on a burner phone he thought no one knew about. He had a plan. Beautiful in its simplicity. He had found out that Rowan had filed for legal custody of Noah 3 days ago, right after disappearing from her apartment. Custody meant she was claiming the boy was hers. Custody meant she was claiming he was not Tyler's. Tyler had a falsified document, something he had paid a forger $700 to create, that claimed he was Noah's biological father and that Rowan had kidnapped the child. All he needed was 2 cops who owed him favors, and those 2 cops would show up at her new address with an arrest warrant, and then everything would collapse. He had already sent the forged documents to Officers Halley and Webb. He had already made the calls. They were coming this afternoon. Tyler took another drink and smiled into the empty apartment. 3 blocks away, in the building superintendent's office, a phone rang. The superintendent recognized the voice on the other end immediately. It was the woman who had moved into the 32nd floor 5 days ago, the one who always said please and thank you and tipped generously even though she clearly had no money. There's a man at the front entrance, Rowan said, and the superintendent could hear the fear in her voice, real and raw. 2 cops with him. He's trying to get upstairs. Please don't let him come up. Please call the number on the card I gave you. The superintendent called the number. Matteo was in his office when his phone rang. He listened to Carlo explain the situation in 8 words or less, the way his men were trained to operate. Then he stood, rolled his neck once to the left, once to the right, and walked to his private elevator. Call in the team, he said to Gino, who was waiting in the hallway like a shadow that had learned to wear a suit. Full tactical. I want them silent and invisible. Tyler Brennan does not get to terrorize her again. Rowan was in the apartment with Noah when Matteo arrived. She was sitting on the floor of Noah's room, and the boy was asleep with his head on her lap, his small hand wrapped around a worn stuffed rabbit that had traveled with them through 3 shelters and 4 evictions. When Matteo appeared in the doorway, she looked up with eyes that had gone hollow with fear. Come with me, he said. She carried Noah to the master bedroom, where Matteo had ordered blackout curtains and a safe room installed 2 days after they arrived. Not a cage. A sanctuary. A place where nothing from the outside world could reach them. He locked the door with a keycode only he knew. Stay here, he said. Do not come out. Do not make a sound. No matter what you hear, do not come out. Matteo. Trust me. And she did. That was the terrifying part. She did. Downstairs, in the lobby, Officers Halley and Webb were trying to convince the building superintendent that they had legitimate cause to enter. They didn't know that the security cameras had stopped recording 8 minutes ago. They didn't know that 2 of Matteo's men were already in the stairwell behind them. They didn't know that their phones were being cloned. Tyler Brennan was in his apartment with Sophie Langford when it happened. Sophie was filming something on her phone. Of course she was, a selfie video where she was laughing about how easy it had been to ruin that pathetic shelter girl. She had posted it to 3 different social media accounts. She thought she was untouchable. The door opened without knocking. 12 men in black tactical gear moved through the apartment like ghosts. No sound. No warning. No mercy. Tyler spun from the window, dropped his whiskey glass, and it shattered across the hardwood floor like the sound of his life breaking apart. Matteo Valenti walked in last, flanked by Carlo and Gino, and the pure weight of his presence made the air in the room grow thin. "You can't be here," Tyler stammered. "This is a residential building, you can't just." "I can," Matteo said, and his voice was quiet, which meant it was lethal. "I can do whatever I want. Now you are going to watch something." Carlo opened a laptop. The footage appeared on the wall, projected in brutal clarity. 8 years of security camera footage from Rowan's old apartment building. Every time Tyler came home drunk. Every time his fists found her. Every time she screamed. Every time she bled. And there were the police reports. 8 of them. All marked unfounded in the margins. And there were the bank records. Wire transfers from Tyler Brennan to Detective Marcus Webb. To Officer Sean Halley. To Sergeant David Chen. $700 each, transferred monthly, like a subscription to silence. Tyler's face went white as ash. "That is currently being delivered to the FBI, Matteo said, checking his watch with theatrical precision, the Internal Affairs Division, and every major news outlet in Los Angeles. It goes live in 4 minutes. You will be arrested before sunset. You will stand trial. You will spend 40 years in federal prison. And every single day of those 40 years, you will remember that this happened because you touched what was mine." Tyler lunged. It was desperate and stupid and exactly what Matteo had anticipated. Gino caught him by the throat, slammed him against the window hard enough that the glass cracked in a spider web pattern. Tyler collapsed to his knees, trembling like a cornered animal, tears streaming down his face. "Please. Please. I'll disappear. I'll never." "Too late," Matteo said. He turned to Sophie Langford, who was trying to inch toward the door. "You filmed a woman being assaulted," he said to her. "And you threatened to destroy her livelihood for entertainment. For a joke. For content." He paused. "Check your phone." Sophie's hands shook as she pulled out her device. Her face went from pale to gray as she scrolled through hundreds of messages. Her charity board positions, all revoked. Her husband's car dealerships, 3 major suppliers canceling contracts effective immediately. Invitations rescinded. Friends blocking her number. Her social circle evaporating like morning mist. Sophie screamed. Actually screamed. A sound of pure anguish and disbelief that she, Sophie Langford, could be treated this way. "You had friends," Matteo said. "Now you have nothing." The FBI raid happened at dawn. Full tactical, helicopters circling, news vans already positioned outside the building. Tyler Brennan, handcuffed, read his rights, his face swollen from crying. Perp walked past 12 cameras. Sophie Langford was arrested separately at her parents' house. The footage went viral in 47 minutes. By morning, 3 corrupt cops were suspended and under federal investigation. Tyler's bail was set at $2 million he could never pay. Every news outlet in the country had run the story. Rowan's name was everywhere, but no longer as a victim. As a survivor. As a woman who had survived 8 years of abuse alone and lived to tell about it. And in the apartment on the 32nd floor, Rowan held Noah close while the sunrise painted the city gold, and for the first time in 8 years, she believed that maybe she was not nothing. 2 months after the raid, Rowan Santos sat at a mahogany desk in a corner office on the 28th floor of a Los Angeles high-rise, her name engraved on a brass plate outside the door, Operations Director. The city sprawled beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows like a kingdom of glass and steel. She wore a navy blazer that fit her shoulders perfectly, her hair pulled back in a braid, her hands steady as they moved across the keyboard. No grease stains. No orthopedic shoes worn through at the heel. Just a woman reviewing logistics contracts, her finger tracing numbers that other people depended on, numbers that mattered. It was the kind of ordinary moment that should have felt impossible. The spreadsheet in front of her contained a $17,000 error in Mateo's procurement accounts. Rowan had found it by accident, her eye catching a figure that did not align with the pattern. She traced it backward through 6 months of records, found the mistake on a Tuesday afternoon, corrected it in silence, and printed the document on cream-colored paper. Mateo would never know she had caught it unless she told him. That was the point. The correction sat on his desk at 6 in the evening, nothing written except a single line in her handwriting, "You're welcome." Carlo and Gino found it first. The two men stood in Mateo's office the following morning, staring at the corrected spreadsheet, then at each other with expressions of complete bewilderment. Carlo turned the page over as if a message might be hidden on the back. In 15 years, Carlo said slowly, I have never seen him smile. Gino's eyes were still fixed on the paper. She saved him $50,000. She just fixed it. No conversation. No payment request. She just fixed it and left. When Mateo arrived at his office, he read the correction in silence. Then he read it again. His jaw moved slightly, a small muscle flexing beneath the scar that ran from his eye to his cheekbone. He picked up his phone and called Rowan without any preamble. Come to my office. She appeared 5 minutes later, still holding the report she had been reviewing. Is something wrong with the contracts? No. He stood at the window, his hands in his pockets, the city behind him like a stage. The accounting error. How long have you known? 3 days. You corrected it without telling me. You were in meetings. It seemed faster to just handle it. Mateo turned from the window. You saved this company $50,000. I did my job. Rowan. Her name sounded different when he said it, like a word in another language that could only be spoken one way. Come here. She walked across the office to where he stood. The Los Angeles skyline stretched behind him, cloudless and burning. He did not touch her. He simply looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat, and then he said, I never thanked you properly. For Noah. For 3 years of, he paused, searching for words. For keeping him alive when no one else would. Rowan's shoulders tightened. They had not talked about this, not directly. In 2 months of working together, they had maintained a careful distance, conversations professional, interactions cordial. You paid my debt, she said. We're even. We will never be even. His voice sounded like stone. You gave him everything when you had nothing. You worked double shifts in a diner at 3 in the morning. You lived on coffee and scraps. You survived 8 years that should have broken you into pieces. And you never once let him see you break. Rowan looked away. Through the window, the city moved silently below them, millions of people living their small lives, unaware that inside this building, a woman who used to count crumpled dollar bills was standing in a 3,000-square-foot office. You were never broken, Mateo continued, his voice lower now. Hurt, yes. Surviving, yes. Exhausted until your bones ached with a tiredness that had no cure. But never broken. Some days I'm not sure I survived. The words came out before she could stop them. Some days I think I'm just, she stopped, unable to finish. Still standing, Mateo said. Which is all that matters. Not how many times you fell. Only that you stood back up. Rain began outside, a gentle percussion against the windows. Not a thunderstorm this time. Something quieter. Something that sounded almost like peace. Rowan watched it streak the glass and said, Why do you care? Really? There are 1,000 women in this city who need help. You could protect any of them. Mateo stepped closer, but not close enough to touch. Because when I watched you stand between Noah and that man, I saw someone who understood what I built my empire on. Protection. Justice. Making sure the people we love never suffer again. He paused. I saw myself. The part of me that refused to let anyone else carry a burden they did not create. I'm not part of your empire. No, Matteo said. You're part of my family. If you choose to be. The words hung in the air between them, dangerous and tender and absolutely true. Rowan's eyes filled with tears, and she turned toward the window so he could not see them. Behind her, she heard him move away, heard the soft click of the office door closing. What she did not know was that in a federal prison 300 miles north, Tyler Brennan was negotiating with federal prosecutors. He had made a deal. His testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would claim Matteo had forced him to assault Rowan, would manufacture evidence, would construct a narrative of organized crime and coercion. And in a high-rise apartment downtown, Sophie Langford was funding the prosecution's case with the last of her liquid assets, her charity board positions gone, her social circle evaporated, her desperation crystallizing into a single obsession, revenge. Neither of them knew that the woman they had tried to destroy was no longer the person they remembered. 6 months later, the courthouse in downtown Los Angeles was surrounded by news vans and cameras. Rowan sat in the gallery between Matteo and Noah, her son in a blue suit that made him look impossibly grown up. Tyler Brennan took the stand with a manufactured expression of remorse. He testified that Matteo had ordered him to assault Rowan, that it was a message, that organized crime had orchestrated the entire situation as a means of control. Every word was a lie. The defense attorney tore through his testimony like tissue paper. Proved the timeline did not match. Produced alibi witnesses. Showed that Tyler had no contact with Matteo's organization, that the assault predated any connection between them, that the narrative was a fabrication constructed in federal prison as an exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge's face remained impassive as the evidence accumulated, as the witness fell apart, as the entire prosecution's case collapsed under the weight of its own fabrication. Contempt of court, the judge said. 5 additional years. Tyler Brennan was led from the courtroom screaming accusations, his face contorted with rage and desperation. Sophie Langford stood up in the gallery and was escorted out by security, her threats echoing down the hallway. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Rowan with microphones and cameras. A woman asked, "How does it feel watching your abuser imprisoned?" Rowan stood tall, her shoulders back, her voice steady and clear. "It feels like justice. Not revenge. Justice. For 8 years I thought I was powerless. I was wrong. Real strength is not found in never falling but in always standing back up." She reached down and took Noah's hand. Beside her, Matteo stood with his arm around both of them, and in that moment, they looked like what they had become, a family forged from survival and choice. 3 weeks later, Rowan hung her old stained apron in a frame on the wall of her office. Beside it, she hung the debt collector's letter, stamped in red, paid in full. Reminders. Trophies of a life transformed. Matteo appeared in the doorway with coffee in his hand, prepared exactly the way she liked it. Espresso, 2 sugars, splash of cream. He had been leaving it on her desk for months without comment or conversation. "Still keeping trophies?" he asked. Rowan smiled, genuinely smiled. Reminders. There's a difference. He set the coffee on her desk with careful precision. "Dinner tonight?" "You, me, Noah." "Family dinner." "Family dinner," she repeated. When Matteo left, Rowan looked at the framed apron, then at the stamped letter, then out at the Los Angeles skyline burning gold in the afternoon light. She thought of the woman who used to count crumpled dollar bills in a diner bathroom at 3 in the morning. That woman was gone. This woman had taken her place. This woman stood tall. This woman had survived. And she had rebuilt everything on her own terms. Like a blade cutting through darkness, she had chosen not just to endure, but to rise. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling us what moment hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will remind you that strength comes in many forms. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones we saved first. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.